Bills Mafia, friends, esteemed colleagues, worst enemies. Thank you all so much for being here for this week's episode of Under Review. My name is Joe DeRosa. You can find me on X/Twitter at show_DeRosa. Last week on this program, we talked about Josh Allen. We talked about all the things we can expect out of him, projections, things that we felt we liked last year that we hope we can like this upcoming season. And we are now going to translate that conversation over to the Bills' many pass catchers. Now, this is not exclusively wide receivers. This could be tight ends, running backs, coaches that want to get on the field and get a little crazy. I'm just kidding. But I'm very excited to talk about this topic. And I'm excited to be bringing on my guest tonight, a returning member of the show, a member of Cover One. His name is Chris Seth, and the two of us will be navigating. If I could only get through this intro without stuttering one time, that would be great. We will be navigating this group of pass catchers and everything we are expecting out of them this upcoming season. I hope you're excited for the discussion, and even if you aren't, thank you for being here. I don't know why you would be, but I'll give you that credit. So without further ado, everybody, let's get this one going, and let's go.
Previous play will go under review.
People of Earth and extraterrestrials that are on different planets, thank you so much for being here for this week's episode of Under Review. Again, if you are a returning fan of the show, someone here for the first time, the first thing I'll ask you to do is sit back and relax. And the second thing I'll ask you to do is, if you are feeling kind, drop a like on this video, share it with your friends. If you know a Bills fan or football fan that is looking for some content, here is some content. Feel free to share it. Feel free to throw some support. And joining me tonight, again, I think the third time you've been on the show, Chris, but Mr. Chris at the Cover One, thank you so much for being here. I always appreciate your time. How you doing tonight?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Joe. I'm very excited. I'm going to start out by apologizing, though, for the fact that I am not Mina Kimes.
I just saw that first time.
So just in case you tuned into the wrong episode, I am not Mina Kimes. In fact, that's a different show. Love Aunt, love Mina. But it's Joe and I here today, and we are gonna have a good time talking about the wide receivers and the pass catchers in general, all of them, and have a good time breaking it down.
Oh man, yeah, that's great. I literally just noticed that right when we went live, saw that, and that is funny, man. And honestly, yeah, guys, if you get a chance to after this program, or if you were able to watch it prior to joining us tonight, our very own Anthony Prohaska, I had him on the show a few weeks ago. Again, just a great member of our network who does a lot of great work. Got the one and only Mina Kimes on his show, so feel free to check out that episode of Disguise Coverage, a pre-recorded one, so it is a video. It will not be live after our program tonight like it usually is, but you should really check it out. It's an awesome discussion. Shout out to both of them. It was great. But not Mina Kimes. Again, thank you for being here. And tonight's episode, I'm super pumped because, again, like when I talked about Josh Allen last week, I figured it was only right that we transition to this topic, which is the targets that he's going to be throwing to. And naturally, it's been a big point of conversation and contention amongst our fans, amongst peers in the NFL that really have been looking at this team in a vacuum, and they see the departure of Stephon Diggs, the departure of Gabe Davis, and they look at the addition of Keon Coleman, who's going to be a rookie, and kind of a 50-50 split on whether he'll be good or not, or really some of the free agency signings they made that aren't trading for Justin Jefferson, getting Brandon Ayuk, or signing T. Higgins after a trade, something crazy like that. So there's naturally, I guess if you want to call it, a polarizing outlook on this group of pass catchers. And I first want to ask you your thoughts on the moves this team has made, and really kind of from last year to this year, your overall outlook on the room before we get into it.
Yeah, I think anytime you're all of a sudden without Stephon Diggs, that you have gotten worse in terms of talent. Now, that's not completely fair because Diggs is an incredible top-end talent, and every wide receiver room and pass-catching group is a collection, right? So I actually think that as a collective, they are more even across the line if they don't have that one, predetermined alpha. So I like the room. but it's also hard to predict, right? Like we have not had a wide receiver room or a group of pass catchers for years that was as uncertain as this group, right? Like since Diggs came into the team, you knew who was your number one. And Gabe Davis was a solid presence as a number two. Beasley for a long time was a very solid slot option, and you had these predetermined roles before you even got into the season. As fans, we could say, oh yeah, we know how this is going to play out. I have no idea how 2024 is going to play out for wide receivers, other or pass catchers. I'm going to correct myself again, pass catchers, because Dalton Kincaid is going to be that number one. Like I think that's the only thing I feel like I know going into this. So we actually probably stop the show there. But yeah, see ya.
Hey guys.
So I think that's about all we know, though, that we can say for certain at this point.
Right.
And really and truly, like if Curtis Samuel ends up the de facto number one, I'd be surprised, but that's bigger than a non-zero chance, right? Like maybe there's a 10% chance that Curtis Samuel ends up being the number one target getter on this team, and it's possible. Maybe that's how things play out. And so there hasn't been, since 2019, I don't feel like there's been a season where we've gone in knowing less about what our group of pass catchers is going to look like.
That's a great point. And I said this with Uber, I think 2 weeks ago, and something I've said a few times this offseason. This is probably the most uncertain time we've had about this team since 2019, because going into that year, it was all about second year of Josh. What will that look like? How will that pan out? Could this team win 9 games? And they end up winning. They went 10-6 that year, but with room to win more if they had to. They clinched the playoff spot. They weren't getting the division from Brady. So it was 10-6. That could have been an 11-5 if they actually cared in that final week. But that's kind of the thing for me is you go into this, and why I bring up that it's a point of contention and conversation is no one really has an answer for what this team will be, because it's just such a dramatic shift really for the first time in years. And naturally it's hard to kind of be sure of anything besides the Kincaid reception point that you brought up. But also it's in a way for people hard to be optimistic, because when you talk about what this team had been for the past few years, it's been a prolific offense that went through their alpha in Stefon Diggs, and Stefon Diggs was a huge portion of the target share and reception count. So you pivot off that. You now introduce a lot of names that have either not played with the team or have not been leaned on the way that other players have been in the past. And what you have is a room that is unproven with a question mark looming over it. And I think that is fair for fans and pundits and everybody to say that they got to prove that without Diggs, they can be a viable offense, and that these pass catchers can step up in the absence of Diggs. And why I really like the way you started that off is because you used the term collective. And I think that when you talk about this group of pass catchers, you do have to look at it as a collective. I keep saying pass catchers, you keep saying pass catchers, because that exact reason. I think it's unfair to evaluate the Buffalo Bills on their wide receiver room alone. And this is not me saying that the wide receiver room is totally fine and how I would have built it, because it's not. I had different visions for this Buffalo Bills wide receiver room going into this offseason that I'm honestly surprised it's panned out this way instead of the way a lot of us had envisioned. But I do believe that the evaluation of the Buffalo Bills offense needs to be worked in tandem with how their tight end room is constructed, how their running back room is even constructed, because all of these facets, as we have seen under Joe Brady, are contributors to a very versatile, fluid passing attack, which is what I think you're going to see a lot this upcoming season. And looking at it from last year, a change in identity. We've talked about this so many times. I brought it up a million times. Watching Ant's episode, that was brought up a lot of times too. It's a very big shift for this Bills team that really didn't rely on this. And one thing, and I'm going to ask you if you agree with this before we move on to the first topic, Chris, but to me, this is kind of just like a vibes-based take. I don't have any empirical data to back this up, as much as I'm just kind of throwing it from the hip. But it felt like the team was a far more finesse style team, right? Because when you work through an alpha and when you're just trying to throw the ball a lot and you're not leaning on your rock as much as you can, it puts you in some binds, especially when teams change the way they defend you. And now, given the fact that the defenses in the NFL are shifting their landscape and changing the way they defend explosives, it feels like this team, a point that Uber made, a point many in our network have made before, is just trying to be more physical and be more of a bully. So do you feel like the response of the offensive shift for this team is kind of based on the fact that maybe that finesse style is just something they felt wasn't working anymore?
I think it's certainly possible. As we've, we watched it with the Chiefs, right? As they've gone through their progressions and their developments, trying to find answers for the cover two shells and for the way defenses have been playing these explosive attacks. And I think that, starting to see more reliance on versatility, which and versatility not just in scheme but also versatility in just a physical nature of football too, right? Like, I want to be able to play not just several schemes, but when I want to turn on bully ball, like, I want that to be in my back pocket as well. And guys like adding Osiris Torrance was a big indicator for that for me last year. And then you look at some of the wide receivers they've brought in. Like, Coleman is a physical freak. Like, he is a beast of a wide receiver. And I think a lot of what we're about to see is that not just a team that relies on Allen being able to put a ball where he wants to, but can also pound you and move you against your will when they need to, and just as an added element to force you to think about. Like, it's not just versatility in passing, but it's versatility in how we execute different types of runs and the different threats you have to be prepared for.
Yeah. And that's beautifully said, because a lot of the pivots you're seeing in their personnel are trending to being more physical. And you bring up Torrance, who was a stray from the norm with Aaron Cromer. And naturally, Aaron Cromer's still going to get his guys with like a crazy athletic profile. But one thing about Torrance that was known, especially in Florida's offense, which was known to be a very run heavy offense, is that Torrance is a mauler. And that you're adding in that kind of sucker punch in the offensive line that you really needed next to Spencer Brown. Because it felt like in 2022, a big problem was that their running game, while it could at times be effective and work, especially when conceptually they had things grooving and they were leaning on it a bit, there were times where they got bullied. There were times where they didn't really have that effective push with guys like Sappho, guys like I believe Bates was manning guard, and I don't think Bates is bad at it per se, but it really just felt like there weren't a team that you were really terrified of the running attack, that they didn't have that ability to get that significant push as far as they would have liked to, as consistently as they would have liked to. So now you enter this year, and it seems that everything is catering to that style with, some exceptions in their wide receiver room, but guys that, even if they aren't the biggest dudes, are still willing blockers, still can be effective, still have developed that. And I really see that trend continuing of, this is going to be a team that, while they still have Josh and they'll still throw the hell out of the ball, that they do want to kind of just emerge as a team that you need to respect in the trenches and with their rushing attack. Because really, one thing that I'll say is, I have always felt that the Buffalo Bills are at their most dangerous when Josh Allen does not have to press. And a way to get a team with Josh Allen that doesn't have to press is easier and more manageable downs and distances on second and third, or not even hitting third if you want to be really, really insane, which that's unrealistic. Then I think you talk about a team that puts Josh Allen in a comfortable position, third and short, third and 5, see the field, and then couple that in with the style of offense that's going to be a lot more dedicated to attacking the middle of the field and creating those openings. I think that there is a recipe for success here that should breed some optimism, some skepticism at first, but optimism in the sense that the concept of what they do, I don't think is far-fetched, and I think could be executed well, because there's tangible evidence to say this was working under Joe Brady in the second half of last year. So any final points on that, Chris, before we move on?
Just kind of one last thing. Like, even though I said that, like, losing Diggs is kind of this decrease undeniably in talent, like, that doesn't mean I'm not excited about, what could be the positive outcome for this group. I think all told, this is a deeper group than Allen has had for a couple of years now. And I think that, if the best case scenario for guys like Samuel and Shakir and Coleman play out, then this could be it could be the same thing as the way we talked about Terrell Bernard at linebacker leading into last season, where everyone was worried about it, and then he comes out and he is an assassin. And
right.
if we get best case scenario for a couple of guys, I think that we will all be talking about how smart Brandon Beane is, how brilliant Joe Brady is. Allen is on track for one of the best years in his career. And so I think that potential is there. It's just that we don't know yet what it's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the question mark, the skepticism, the even doubt at some points from some different fans, I think is fair. I think it is warranted, but one thing that I keep saying is that every question mark has two possible answers. Well, I guess three if you want to be like super specific about it, but let's just call it good two possible answers, good and bad. Not every answer to the question has to be a bad answer. It could be a positive. Just because you don't know it doesn't mean that you have to view it as a pure negative, which is, I think, a thing that happens with a lot of turnover in the league. And one thing that I've noticed too is that, when you look at a team that's constructed a certain way and you see roster changes, you end up automatically jumping to the negative. You end up automatically going to, this isn't going to work. They lost this guy, but then lose the idea of coaching and development and the fact that a team could really put something together still. I mean, I think a lot about my old hating days of the New England Patriots because I went to college in New England and I remember all my roommates were Pats fans. So I try every assailable way to tear down a team that was winning Super Bowls basically every goddamn year. It hurts. And one thing that I do remember doing was like saying, you guys lost this free agent. You guys lost this defensive player. This guy's gone. And guess what would happen? They'd still have a top defense because they still had Bill Belichick. They still had a top offense because they still had Tom Dan Brady. It doesn't change. And that's my thing with the Buffalo Bills, just talking about the team as a whole right now. Roster personnel changes do matter and it will affect a team, but that doesn't mean the full outlook of a team's season is in peril or done just because they made changes. The safeties got younger. Maybe they added more depth to their D-line. The wide receiver room has gone through an identity shift where it almost feels like Stephon Diggs is an ego death for what the Buffalo Bills offense once was, and really a symbolic transition to what they are about to be, which is very different, which is why I don't think they should be evaluated the same way as they once were, and why I think when we get into the nitty-gritty of this discussion, we'll see the reasons as to why we shouldn't be doing that. So my final thoughts on
Joe,
it.
Joe, did you know that Diggs had 76% more targets than the second most targeted player on the Bills last year? Like he was at like 159 targets. He was at 159 targets and Kincaid was at 90. 76% more targets. Like
that's crazy.
I don't even understand why he was possibly unhappy. Like maybe he was unhappy with other things. I'm not going to speculate about that stuff, but like he was fed every possible target you would want. Like I don't know what his target share was, but like it had to be one of the highest in the league. And I think what we're going to see, this upcoming season is a much more balanced approach to the wide receiver group to the pass catching group as a whole. But like that, so yeah, I mean that was absolutely crazy.
Thank you for joining us, Ryan. Marquez Stevenson could be an answer. No, he couldn't because he's not on the team. I don't even think he's in the NFL.
I'll tell you what Marquez Stevenson is the answer to. He's the answer to the next name Ryan's going to misspell. Okay, that's
he's the answer to a trivia question: is who was the last receiver the Bills drafted from Houston when they draft another receiver from Houston someday? Could have been Tank Dell last year, honestly. But wait, it was Houston, right? I didn't just flub that on the air, correct? Someone check me if I'm wrong. Anyways. And also, I like this comment from Roy. Maybe not bad, but definitely unknown. That alone makes some fans question it. Exactly. It's okay to question it. We're not saying you have to like every move. It's your prerogative to feel a certain way, but rather just, it doesn't mean it's going to be bad. I just think there's logic into seeing how these moves are made and what they could mean for the team going forward. And so all my stats that I've put together for this show, Chris, I put in playoffs included. I always do that just because, like, again, you never know if there's going to be a jump or anything. But I mean, feel free to continue on with anything regular season because it's the same concept we're trying to get to. But if you add in playoffs, Diggs has 175 targets. The next closest is Kincaid with 101. So yes, it is a commanding amount of the overall targets, and then receptions 117. He came through a lot. But let's get more deeply into this. So we are talking about this pivot. We're talking about Joe Brady's change. So when we talk about it just from an on-the-field view and what you're going to see kind of on a week-to-week basis, we have talked about that it could look different just based on game plan. But in your eyes, how do you feel this wide receiver room will actually be utilized? If you had to talk about anything from
Mhm.
strategy to how you view, the personnel usage in certain parts of the formation. Like, what is your outlook of the wide receiver room under Joe Brady, just as actual use?
Yeah, I think we're going to see newfound versatility. You know, the Bills would move guys around some, but largely for last year, Shakir was your slot guy. Diggs would come there a little bit. Davis would come there a little bit. But I think you're going to see everybody able to play from any position as a pass catcher at virtually any moment. Curtis Samuel could end up out wide. He can be in the slot. He's had success in the slot, but and especially with Brady, like we've all heard that anecdote about his best season with was Brady. Brady put him in the slot, and he kind of exploded in 2020 that year. Well, there's a little bit of a news flash about Curtis Samuel. Like he's also really good out wide too. His let me pull that up right quick. So last year with Sam Howell as his core, he had a 0.44 EPA per target, and that was just out wide. That was his EPA per target when he was out wide, and that was 30th overall for any pass catcher, wide receiver, tight end, running back, anybody. 30th overall EPA per target out wide. He is not only a slot player. Like his skill set, he's probably not a 4.33 speed guy anymore, but his skill set is versatile. And Shakir's skill set is also going to be versatile. He might end up being the primary slot receiver again. And he and Kincaid might kind of share that. But
Yeah.
I think what we're going to see more so than anything is you come out of the huddle and Curtis Samuel could be in the backfield and
Right.
Cook is out wide and Kincaid is in the slot. And then all three of those guys could motion and be in completely new formation. I think that's completely feasible with the skill set that they have, again, as a collective, as a pass catcher by committee. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I fully agree with that. And that was what I was probably going to get at too, is I feel that it is, again, referring to what was said before, a more fluid presence of receivers where it's not really so much
That's good.
boxing people
Really
to
good.
only be out wide, but really just anyone can really beat you anywhere. And there's a lot of versatility within some of the skill position guys. So you talk about Curtis Samuel, that's really where I was going to go with it too, because I look at what he was doing in 2020 with Joe Brady. And, you bring up his best season because it was. And that's
Yep.
without a caliber quarterback of Josh Allen. Like, I think it was Teddy
Yep.
Bridgewater at the time or Sam Darnold to start and then turn over to him. That's a bad fact. I completely blanked on that one. But talking about
No,
Samuel's
I think it was
actual
Bridgewater.
output.
I think it was Bridgewater.
It was
Yeah,
Bridgewater? Okay. Because
I
I can't
believe so.
remember
I believe so.
when Sammy Biscuits took over there. But Curtis Samuel got a lot of usage in different spots. And that was the thing that I really wanted when it was free agency and he was one of my top targets, is you bring in Curtis Samuel, who he might not be your conventional size guy, which is one thing I thought they were going to need at the time. Eventually get it with Coleman. My God, I don't know
Yep.
why my brain's flatlining so much right now. But I also think about the usage. I think about lining him up in the backfield. I think about where he could be in the slot, maybe motion him out wide if you need to. He's not the type of guy that I feel when you put him in press coverage and one-on-one, he's going to end up going, past the guy in a blinding speed, where he could still. I think he could get a step on a guy, but I don't think that's what you're going to ask him to do. But rather the nice piece that, because of his versatility and he lines up in multiple spots, could actually get those wins because maybe he gets motioned out wide and ends up getting a free release that gets him open. It's something Joe Brady might be able to do with that familiarity of having him back in Carolina. And then you talk about Shakir. I do think Shakir will wind up with more slot snaps in general, because I think Samuel will be moved around a bit more than Shakir will. But like, again, Shakir's another guy that you could put out wide if you want. And he has won some of those matchups before. He has made some great plays in the open field or in the deeper parts of the seam. And you've seen that capability. And I think the thing is, when we talk about some of these receivers, and I'll keep going on it, I think a lot of it is, well, who can replace Diggs? The reality is Diggs is going to be replaced by the committee, you were saying. It's not that one person has to have the same skill set Stephon Diggs did. It's that there's going to be a myriad of different positions that all of these receivers are going to be in, where they just have to make a play. And it could be on any given play they're able to go upfield. And they might not have to win as consistently as Diggs did, and they might not carry the same route running prowess. But guess what? If the formation works, if they read the defense well and they have other facets of their game working, then the deep threat could be the friends we made along the way. It could really just be any one of these receivers that's just capable of getting a release off and being able to get open effectively, which I think there are a lot of options to do that. And that does fall on Joe Brady to make that happen. And when I think about, again, Keon Coleman, I know he's going to be their X, but what is the definition of an X in this offense compared to in years previous? Like, how much does that actually change role wise? I think Keon Coleman, similar to what Diggs got in the second half of the year because he was the X, and this is how Joe Brady seemed to use him a lot, is still going to get a lot of those route options and a lot of those targets in spots where he excels, like slants, like hitches, things that showcase his lateral agility and his ability to, even with minor separations, still make a play on a ball. So I think when you look at that group, and then you could add in some of the other guys, like MVS, I think is your conventional speed guy. He's going to go upfield, but he could do things, from 0 to 9 yards too, and be in the screen game because of his big body. And then you could talk about Matt Collins, who, you talk about Curtis Samuel. I don't have the metrics for Hollins, but one thing that I'm suspicious of is how he's going to perform with a quarterback like Josh Allen. Because Matt Collins, he's entering his 30 years old, his season at 30 years old, but, he's been someone that's had some success winning upfield before and is another big body that can win these contested opportunities or maybe get open if he has the release. So it's not to say that I think the wide receiver room is perfect. I do think that these wide receivers, though, are going to get opportunity. And I think that there is a myriad of ways, given their skill sets, that they can have success. And I'm excited to see how Joe Brady kind of mix and matches them, because ultimately when you talk about when you talk about versatility, like that also means someone has to know how to make that versatility work. Because, this is a term I've heard you say it, I've heard Anthony say it, I've heard so many people say it, but it rings true every time. It's all about pushing the right buttons at the right times. If Joe Brady recognizes what a defense is good at and what it isn't good at, I think that this Bills offense does contain a myriad of different skill sets that can win against anybody as long as you can push the buttons at the right time.
Yep. And more so than ever, this offense is going to be dependent on not just Josh Allen. It'll always be dependent on Josh Allen. He's Josh Allen, okay? But it will be dependent not on the remarkable skill set of an outstandingly talented wideout. It's going to be dependent on an offensive coordinator who's going to need to, really and truly do a better job schematically than Ken Dorsey did. There were a lot of good things about what Ken Dorsey put on the field, but there were a number of things that we talked about repeatedly last year, before Brady was brought on, that just did not look as good as they should. Why could they not run mesh? Why are we constantly doing these trail routes? Everybody in the league by week 5 knew we were running these trail routes in the end zone. And why? Bring something more for me, right? And why can't we get the spacing or timing right on mesh? A level of that is, sets on the players, but 30% of that sets on coaching too. Why can't we make that happen? And you also, Eric did a great job of pointing out some differences in the way Cook was running routes, pre and post Brady, and just some of the insistence on the angles and getting tighter to defenders before cutting breaks. If players don't come in to the season with those things in their bag, those are tools coaches should be able to add. Those finer points are not about, what physical skills a player is bringing. It's about the technical aspects of the game, and that's dependent on coaching. And I there were definitely good things about Ken Dorsey's offense, but this year, with that decrease in, the loss of that number one talent, and having an acceptable collective of wide receivers, this season is going to be dependent on Joe Brady doing a better job than Ken Dorsey did in installing an offense that creates pass catchers getting open, schemed open. That phrase that we hear all the time, but get them legitimately schemed open. And that needs to happen at a higher rate. And Josh needs to get them into the right plays. And then, for the love of God, let's also have a screen game, please.
Yeah. which I think they're going to, or at least try to have this year because of some of the personnel decisions they've made. And, we were talking about target share too. And I pulled up Carolina in 2020 before we went live because we were having a conversation before we went live about how we can't talk and search at the same time. There's no shot I would do that while I was talking. I have to, when I talk, I'm locked into talking or bringing up comments because I cannot do a search. So I had this pulled up just in case we got here. But, we talked about Diggs dominating the target share. And then I look at the top three in Carolina in 2020 when Brady was there. And you had Robbie Chosen, 134 targets, DJ Moore, 113, Curtis Samuel at 93. So not as much of a stark drop off as it was from Diggs to Kincaid at the end of the playoffs, which was basically about like late 60s in targets.
75, yeah.
Yeah, it was a fair split amongst your top targets. And I'm using the term targets because I see this comment from Walter, and I completely understand this concern, Walter. I do. And this is a valid criticism or at least skepticism or concern to have of the team, because he says people talk about the success of Samuel with Brady, but overlook a large part of why he saw success is because he got to flourish as wide receiver 3 behind a true wide receiver 1 and more, and chosen whom as wide receiver 2. So I have one thing to say about this, and really it's just that while I think it's fair, I also think this is a direct, not his comment, but really the Bills pivoting and having Samuel and still being able to use him is a direct reflection of their outlook of Dalton Kincaid's development and also the outlook of Keon Coleman. Because I do think that if Dalton Kincaid takes a jump in year 2 to a point where he's able to be used around the field more, and I think there was an attempt to do this because at several points post Joe Brady, you were seeing more work upfield with Dalton Kincaid. I think that the ability to expand his role and be able to use him all over the field then in turn makes the versatile threat of Curtis Samuel more daunting. Add in Keon Coleman, who, again, if you're lining him out wide, but he's winning on more of these, again, quick hitters, slants, things that work just really like more 5 to 10 yards down the field with the occasional deep shots, because I think that's how it'll actually work, then I think the success of these two players can correlate to Samuel in a similar way that you saw from Chosen and DJ Moore in 2020, where both of those guys ended up with over 1,000 yards, led the target volume. I think it's going to be a similar situation, only I think that Curtis Samuel is going to have more receptions than he did in well, I don't want to say more than he did in Carolina, but I think he will be a top 3 in target. And I think that those reasons that I mentioned, those players that I mentioned, are going to be kind of the Bills' answer to how they will get him to work at best in his role. Chris, do you agree with this, or do you see it a different way?
Yeah, absolutely. And, a little bit to, is it Walter? I can't quite see it. A little bit to Walter. His point. Part of where having success as wide receiver 3 comes from is because there's a mismatch created there, whether it's talent level or in who opponent has chosen to have in that coverage spot. That's a talent disparity or some type of mismatch that's been created there that allows that particular player, in this case Samuel, to succeed. Well, I think what we're going to see this year for the Bills is that their versatility, that their adaptability, their malleability, that's how they create mismatches. And I again, like, this is me making projections about a year where I think it's, virtually impossible to make projections, but we're also going to do more projections later. But I think I also wouldn't be shocked if we saw a significant uptick in the amount of no huddle or up tempo that they run this year, to give the defense even less time to adjust to the mismatches, to the varying nature of positional alignments, to, just the different player groups that they send out when and where. I think that will also be part of it, because I think Walter is right that the name of the game for this group, and again, also part of why the onus is heavily on Joe Brady and then on Josh Allen to identify the correct mismatch or best mismatch for that given play, is because that they're going to heavily depend on their adaptability and versatility to create the mismatches to highlight each player's skills.
And also, again, I think this is why it's imperative that you talk about the running game too when you talk about how these receivers could be used, because a big part of this offensive identity is going to be the physicality and their ability to move the ball with James Cook, with Ray Davis, and with Ty Johnson, and with Josh Allen, of course. I think, again, when you end up in these short yardage situations, it's not just a strength for Josh Allen, but also a strength for Samuel, who's had a lot of success as a slot receiver. So even if you're worried about maybe Diggs being gone and the Curtis Samuel won't replicate those numbers. And I don't think it's going to be like an even replication of what he did in Carolina. I expect more in the range of like 600 to 800 yards, but I expect that for a lot of people. I still expect it to be productive. I think just putting him in those situations as well is going to benefit him as someone who, again, is a menace when you work him in the middle of the field because he is a very good slot option. But then, of course, if you actually get some value in him going upfield because you have other options to work the middle, that also could net to his benefit. And you could end up seeing him as a very productive downfield threat too. So I get the concern here 100%, Walter. And again, I appreciate this comment and you watching, but I do think that there is an opportunity for Samuel to be that same type of weapon, even if it means you don't have a Stephon Diggs here. And let's move on to the tight ends of this room too, because we've been talking a lot about these wide receivers, but tight ends as well, Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. It is interesting to me because when we talk a lot about this Bills offense and the outlook of it, a lot of it predicates on Dalton Kincaid being the number one target. And I rightfully think it's going to be that way just when the year's over. So how do you see him really expanding his role this year? And also, if you can, talk to me about Dawson Knox and what you think about his role now that Kincaid seems to be getting more of the established tight end one spot.
Yep. Yeah. Starting with Kincaid, like I absolutely agree. He is going to be the engine of this passing game. And I think in the same way we saw, Diggs be the central gravitational force of the passing game for a number of years. I think they're planning on that being Kincaid this year, that his gravity, his ability, his, preternatural sense of where defenders are on the field, all of the skills that he brings to the table make him that central cog around which everything else revolves. And that his ability to get open in zone, regardless of which type of zone is being played, regardless of what depth he's running to, regardless of where the defenders are, that Kelsey-esque ability to always be open in zone is going to be a primary feature of the offense. And in terms of man, I still think he is where, those plays will begin, or, be that kind of first read. And part of what we've seen from some of his press conferences, during this offseason is him talking about getting better about beating man. And in the film room, Eric and Ant have talked about, some of the other things that he's been able to do, but you could see that with Brady last season in the changes that Kincaid was able to have versus man. Like if we look at his targets versus man from last year, he only had 3 of them, which ranked 18th for weeks 1 through 11 last year. But in weeks 12 through 18, he had 15 targets against man. That ranked 2nd for tight ends last year. And his yards per route run for that same timeline split nearly tripled. It was 0.52 in weeks 1 through 11 with Brady, and it was 1.58 weeks 1 through 11 with Dorsey, and 1.58, with Brady in weeks 12 to 18. And so you can kind of see Brady has already been working with him as not only, that zone beater, but also, finding ways to use Kincaid's abilities versus man as well. So every indication I have for this season is that Kincaid is that gravitational force. And, I think if the satellite players, if the overall cumulative amount of talent has decreased with the loss of Diggs and Davis, I think by pulling defenders towards Kincaid in the middle of the field, that encourages and makes it easier for those satellite players to perform better and have better results. And so I've got more about Kincaid if you wanted, but to talk about Knox some too, the injury last year, it makes it hard to predict what his role will look like with Knox. But because Knox and Allen have had a special connection, particularly in the red zone. We've seen several, red zone touchdowns, between the two of them, especially in the playoffs. Like one sticks out in my mind particularly because I won $500 on that as a first touchdown between Knox and Allen. But there is a connection between those two players, and that makes it. I think if that special connection didn't exist, I think Knox becomes, a barely rosterable tight end 3 in fantasy, right? But for this relationship that he has, my projection for him was, still having around 30 catches come this year. 45 targets, 30 catches, probably in the neighborhood of somewhere of 250 to 300 yards, somewhere in that range, and a handful of touchdowns, because if Kincaid and Coleman are drawing that attention, then that relationship between Allen and Knox should still score some points.
Yeah, that I think Kincaid fantasy owners are going to be pissed this year, not because he's not putting up yards, but a lot of that red zone volume. I think a lot of Kincaid's success and touchdown production is probably going to come from like deeper routes or just things that like aren't in
Mhm.
the immediate red zone, like something akin to like what you saw against Pittsburgh, where they had him work up the seam on a linebacker, like
Yeah.
those types of things. Not always. I'm sure
Mhm.
he'll get his love in the red zone, of course, but I feel like a lot of the volume is in that regard going to go to some of the bigger bodies, or Josh Allen, or them running,
Sure.
or Dawson Knox, who has had a lot of success in the red zone for the Bills. And yeah, I think that's an interesting point you bring up. It is very hard to discuss what Dawson Knox will be in this offense, or what it will look like in tandem with Kincaid, because you only really got to see it in what I would consider its true form in like the final couple of games of the season. Like I think of Miami, I think of the Pittsburgh game
Mhm.
too. Like those games are when you really started to see kind of like what the balance could be, which is, hey, if we're in 12 personnel, like either one of these guys, maybe one of these guys is going to man more of the middle of the field, and we'll have one work up field a bit more to try and pull some coverage away. And it did work. Dawson Knox had some success again in the
Yeah.
red zone, and Dalton Kincaid got his love too. So I think with those two in mind, working with the wide receiver room, Dalton Kincaid, I firmly agree. And it's been a point of discussion really every week. He's the epicenter. Like he is of
Yep.
the pass catching group, the epicenter of it. I think he's going to have the most receptions. I think he's going to have the most yards. I think he is the sun that shines in this room, and that everything that they try to do is going to be done through him one way or the other, similar to how Brady did it with Diggs. Because not saying they're the same player, not saying they're the same player. Please don't think I'm saying they're the same player. They're not. Very different people, very different positions, but they are at least conceptually could be used in a similar way, where Joe Brady used Diggs a lot for window dressing and trying to kind of pull things into a direction where you could feed the middle of the field a bit more, and maybe draw some doubles away, so that if someone wins a one-on-one, it is a one-on-one. There's no safety help, and all of a sudden that deep explosive is an option for you. Or maybe again, if teams are playing a deeper shell and you want to attack that and then just span the middle of the field with some crossing patterns, you can do that too. I think that Dalton Kincaid is going to be manning a lot of that, only this time as a tight end. It's kind of interesting to see how he gets creative with how he's going to pull them away and where he works them, whether that's out of the slot, whether that's out wide. But I think Dalton Kincaid is capable of giving you success from both of those spots. And I think that the Bills are going to lean on that a lot, especially when you talk about a team that maybe can beat you in a more precise or methodical way this year than they could in years past. Because again, when we talk about the running game, when we talk about shortening things up and all the options you have, if the team decides maybe the running game's successful enough to create stack box looks for the Bills, and you're talking about a single high look, give me Dalton Kincaid running up the seam or going out wide every single goddamn time, because he's going to win that matchup and he's going to find a way to get himself open. If you're running any sort of zone coverage, like again, soft spots in the zone, I have full faith in Dalton Kincaid exploiting that. And I think it's just a lot of reservation is coming from not seeing it from Kincaid for a full season. And naturally, the first half of the year was a little underwhelming,
Mhm.
not completely, but a little. But that had a lot to do with, again, usage, and he had a
Mhm.
concussion and working back from it and trust in the offense. This is year two. There is an establishment of Dalton Kincaid. Josh Allen has worked with him. The emphasis is there on him. And I think that point, him being relied on that way, is going to be a big part of how this offense functions, how these pass catchers work. And to talk a little more about Dawson Knox, a full season from him is really what I want first and foremost. Like he's had a lot of
Mhm.
adversity that has led to him missing some time. And then, of course, the injuries have been piling up. And it's been disheartening to see after he gets his extension of a really productive 2021 that he hasn't
Yeah.
particularly lived up to him. But something, and I have this point with a few players on this roster. Kyer Elam's another one in the cornerback room. The lack of pressure might make the diamond. Like it might make him
Mhm.
succeed in a way that maybe the lofty expectations of being Josh's right hand man as that tight end aren't
Mhm.
there as much as they once were. And maybe seeing Kincaid and another tight end that they drafted in the first round could be the incentive to really just bust your tail and play your best ball, especially knowing that the matchups you're going to get aren't going to be the same as they once were, with tight end one probably drawing some different types of better linebackers in coverage. But now maybe Dawson Knox gets exploited or gets to exploit maybe a smaller corner or like an outside linebacker that's not as adept in pass coverage. And then all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, Dawson Knox, like, welcome back. Like, it's nice to see you.
Right.
So I think like talking about the tight end room and pass catchers too, I'm encouraged for the year two leap of Dalton Kincaid. I want to see Dawson Knox succeed. I will believe it when I see it because I need durability. You need to stay on the field. But when you talked about his catch potential, Chris, I think that's perfectly realistic. I know he finished, including playoffs, he finished with 38 targets, 24 receptions on those 38. I think if he could stay on, that number could go up into like 35, 40 range, maybe even higher if they really do start leaning on him a bit more. So tight end room doesn't really concern me. It's more of just how is that dynamic going to work?
Yeah, I've got one question for you, and I have not thought about this at all. So the chat might ridicule me for being ignorant, but like who's a more talented tight end two than Dawson Knox? Like who's a more physically gifted tight end two than Dawson Knox? Like Isaiah Likely for Baltimore.
Maybe Noah Gray could be in that range.
Maybe Noah Gray. But like I think in terms of a tight end two, Dawson Knox is an excellent weapon.
I agree with that.
Maybe I'm underselling his utility in that role because he has a connection with Allen. He's shown an ability to do more, and I might be underselling his role some this year, and in part because of how high my expectations are for Kincaid. Right. But it's certainly possible that I'm underselling Knox, and that we're looking at a guy who turns around and quiets all the people who have been shouting about that contract.
Well, Dawson Knox is someone that, truthfully, injuries and other things, unfortunate. I don't want to blame this as much as just bring it up when we talk about his availability. Maybe partially as to why the output on the field was the way it was, but I think Dawson Knox, has proven that there was a stretch of time where he was a dependable tight end one, and he was a guy that Josh Allen could target in pinches, and that had a lot of red zone production, and that the team did have a lot of reliance on in a few years past. And all you really did was just add in this prospective, young, high ceiling tight end to the room that, with being younger, with having maybe a different skill set, like, he is going to be that one role, but I don't think that's as much of a knock on Dawson Knox as it is just applauding Kincaid's ability. But right. Dawson Knox, I agree with you, Chris. When you ask me off the top of my head, like who I could name as a tight end two that would be in Knox's range or better, or not even better, just like if we want to have this conversation, like Likely is one, Noah Gray is one. I thought Tucker Kraft could develop into one, but I think he just got a bad injury, so he might miss some time. Yeah. But Dawson Knox as a tight end too is honestly a luxury, and someone that I think when you're talking about the noise that this room's going to make, and this is when we talk about this is why I get a bit optimistic about the pass catchers. And my show is a good vibe show. I'm optimistic about everything. I'm a golden retriever, but like it really, like I see the potential of what it could be when I talk about Dawson Knox in tandem with all these other options. Is don't forget about him. Like, don't think that this guy is just a schmuck now or that he lost his ability. Being hurt's one thing, but a fully healthy Dawson Knox is very productive, is a productive tight end in the NFL, is someone that the team valued enough to pay over $70 million in his contract. Naturally, it got reworked because things changed, but there's a lot of reasons to be healthy about, or I just blew it, be optimistic about a healthy Dawson Knox in this offense. And that for that reason, I'm excited. And before we get into kind of like the shaping of the wide receiver room, Chris, there is one group, and that's running backs, that I think we should talk about as well. And that's James Cook, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson. But, we've seen a lot of reliance on James Cook, a lot of reliance on Ty Johnson in the second half of the year, and the attempt of reliance on Latavius Murray, who came through at times. Talk to me about your look at that room and kind of what you expect out of them and how they could be used, if there's any differences to last season and now.
Yeah, I think in terms of, for Cook is an excellent pass catcher. He had some drops, absolutely brutal times. But this was really and truly the first time he's had issues with drops as a pass catcher. Through Georgia, first year in the NFL, drops were not an issue. And I think they get highlighted and focused on because they were just so brutal. It seemed like every time he dropped the ball, it was only because it was a certain touchdown, like, and I think that he will continue to be a prime pass catching option. But having said that, like, Ray Davis is a sneaky pass catcher. Like his performances everywhere he went, like he did better than you thought as a pass catcher for somebody who has this reputation as as a short, stocky, pit bull kind of player. Like he had surprising ability, catching the ball, running routes, sneaking out on wheel or rail or whatever it might be. So I actually have Cook's receptions dropping a little heading into this year, but that's largely because I think Davis is going to be a sneaky option for them as well.
I really like Ray Davis in this room. I like the skill set he provides. I think the receptions he's going to have will be impactful, but not plenty. Like, I think he will get receptions. I just don't think it's going to be a high volume, maybe just to start in his rookie year. But I do think him as a runner is going to be what they truly depend on in his first season. But I do like the idea of occasional screens with him or occasional checkdowns to him or things that can get him the ball in. Screens, please, fingers crossed. But the idea of getting him the ball in open space and letting that skill set shine, I think they drafted him for a very real reason of that being one of his bread and butters and something that he is one of his bread and butters, like a thing you could say, his bread and butter.
It is now.
It is now. You know what? If I say something that isn't a commonly said term or I mess it up, I'm not accepting accountability. I'm just going to say it's a term that exists because I said it.
Yes.
That's a great
outcome
to have. And we press forward. But like Ray Davis, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about what he could bring to this offense, even if not as a pass catcher, as a running back, just opposite of Cook's skill set. I really like what he brings as far as a power back, as someone who has deceptive speed. Again, a balanced runner who is hard to take down, especially in the open field. So getting the ball to him in open space is the idea, something that I hope they do quickly. And if it is more than I expect, that's a pleasant surprise, not one I'll be mad at all. I just have an agenda that I've been throwing out there the past few weeks that I think the top three receiving targets on this offense are three different positions. And I think that is going to be Kincaid, one of Kincaid and Samuel, or one of Samuel and Shakir, excuse me, and then Cook. I think Cook is actually going to be number three. Yes. And I want to just point this out because I actually feel validated. But when I include playoffs, so now this agenda is playoff dependent. So it's not regular season dependent. So you could call me wrong at the end of the year, or you could call me right. But top three in receptions, including playoffs in 2023, were Stephon Diggs with 117, Dalton Kincaid with 81. Who was number three? Who was number three, guys?
I'm going to guess it was James Cook.
It was James Cook with 52. Next was Khalil Shakir with 49. My agenda has never been more alive. It has never been more rampant. It has grown into a beautiful phoenix. But reality is they have built a room of, again, extension of the offense, not just pass catchers and wide receiver and tight end, but running backs, guys that are capable and leaned on. James Cook was sixth in yards from scrimmage among skill position players, sixth in the NFL. That was behind, if I can remember off the top of my head, Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Breece Hall, and Puka Nacua. Don't think I have the order right, but I got those five memorized.
Yeah,
Boom, right. Supercomputer.
Nice.
But I really think that James Cook deserves so much more praise than he gets from national media, which he gets some, and like-minded ball-knowing people do respect it. But I think James Cook is going to be an integral part, not just an option, but an integral part of how this offense functions week to week, game to game, because of his hybrid ability, because of how threatening he is as an outside runner who bounces off tackles, even with bad vision. But someone as a pass catcher in short to intermediate parts of the field, someone that they have stretched the field with at times, someone who has generated explosive plays. When you talk about the Bills offense, it is downright irresponsible to not talk about James Cook because of how impactful I believe he will be to the success of a lot of the other groups in this offense. And I think that James Cook is explosive. If this tandem of Ray Davis and James Cook as pass catchers really does pan out in a way where even Ray Davis is just getting effective targets, like, we got to be pumped about that. That's got to be
Yeah.
something that Bills fans look at and say, wow, like, this is going to be fun. And I think, too, like, again, we've talked about quick passing targets to your running backs as an extension of the run game. That feels like it would be an extension of the run game, almost like what ad block is to watching illegal streams of football games, like an integral, vital thing that keeps the pop-ups away, but keeps the gravy going, keeps the train going. And that's honestly my thoughts on the running back room. Chris, any other thoughts to this?
Yeah, so I completely agree that James Cook is integral and that he is explosive and underappreciated. I think the only reason I have lower expectations for him has nothing to do with his talent, but has to do with his touches. And so I think he had 273 touches last year, and that was the most for a Bills running back since LaShawn McCoy. So I think that was brought on in large part by, Damian Harris's injury, and then, a decline in Latavius Murray as the season went on. And they really had to rely on Cook. And in amazing ways, he performed.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that I think he's going to be, I'm sorry, do you have something to correct me?
No, please continue. I'm pulling up a stat from my phone because I had to take a picture of it because SIS. Yeah. Anyways, go on.
No, so I think that I completely agree with Cook's talent. I think we're going to see fewer touches in an effort to diversify and spread out and play safe with injury concerns. And so that's my only hesitation about that level of excitement for Cook.
And totally fair to feel that way. And again, if that's the case, but it's still productive, I'll never mind it. I want to bring this up, though, because I screenshotted this earlier. But as far as personnel, as far as formation tendencies for Carolina back in 2020, one thing that I did notice is that they ran 22, 10th most in the league, and it was 11th. They used it 11th most in the league, primarily in the run on 43 snaps out of their 50. So I think it is possible that Joe Brady could be running with a lot of 22 in an effort to get two backs on the field for mismatches and honestly ways to manipulate defenses where James Cook could still be getting a decent amount of touches, or at the very least being present on these plays as a pass catching option should they decide to pass out of it a little bit more. And maybe you end up seeing this nice balance where it's Cook and Davis, and it's like, oh shit, how the hell do we defend this? It's something that he did in 2020. I'm curious if they tick it up a bit in 2024. Really just depends on how they feel about the room. But I definitely see where you're coming from, and I don't think that's outlandish in any way. I completely think it's valid to say that maybe just overall production and overall touches will be spread around a bit more, and the volume was kind of a spike due to response. But again, we'll see how the room shapes out, regardless of whether he gets the same target share touches as he did in 2023, more or less. I still think he's a vital part and someone that's going to have a lot of success in this offense. And Chris, we are going to move on to the next topic, unless you have any final points you want to say before we move on.
No. I am going to get in some stats about screens at some point in time. I thought, as we talked about the running backs as a pass catchers, that I would slip this. I would get on my soapbox now.
Do it.
Okay. So give me the easy button. Give me the easy button. Give Josh Allen that easy money. Would you please just somebody give us a screen game? I am begging. Okay, let's look now. Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league, and Andy Reid is one of the best offensive minds that the league has ever seen. But Kansas City was number one in both yards and receptions out of screens. They had 91 screen receptions and around 650 yards in screens. Easy money. Just check down, easy money. The Bills scratch and claw so hard with the stupid screen game every year. They were 22nd in screen receptions at 47, so like a little more than half of what the Chiefs had in easy money. And they were significantly less than half at 297 yards out of screens compared to the Chiefs 646. We need more easy money in this offense. Like, give me more easy money. Just give it. Just give it. Oh my God.
It's free real estate.
It's too for everything we talk about making it easier on Allen. This is one way to make it easier on Allen. And the offense needs that as a tool. I know Allen has struggled with those types of throws in the past. Well, you know what, Josh? It's time to develop that part of the game,
Yeah.
because there is room for growth in this particular aspect of the game. And if they would do it more often, they can be successful at it. They were 10th at the rate at which a screen turned into a first down, at just under 28%. The Lions were number one with with around 40% of their screens turning into first downs. So the Bills weren't bad when they did it. They just didn't do it enough. And
Right.
give me that access to the easy money. And if we want things really and truly to be easier on Josh, then a screen game is a thing that has to see development and growth.
And this is a good comment from Roy, because I was going to respond with that, and then you brought it up. Is it more because Allen's not good at screen throws? So Allen does struggle with it. However,
Mhm.
repetition is the key to mastery. Like, if you keep attempting this in practice, if you make this a focal point of your game and try really hard, at the very least, you can make it better. I'm not saying Allen's going to become the most precise quarterback in the league just from trying to work on this a bit more. Granted, I'm not there in the room. I don't know actually how much they're practicing it, but in games especially, you can have success. And there were times at the end of 2023 where they generated explosives from the screen game, and a big recipient of that was Khalil Shakir. So, I mean,
Mhm.
between a guy like MVS, who I know ran a lot of screens, between some of your running backs like Ray Davis, I think that that's an option. And also, again, like blitz beaters too. I feel like Joe Brady's going to dial up ways to just
Mhm.
get that ball right out of Josh Allen's hands, where it doesn't have to be the single precise wide screen that we know, but maybe some form of slip screen, where maybe it's just, hey, bring all the pressure you want and try to throttle Josh Allen. Because guess what? It's not going to work. We're not going to let that work.
Yeah.
And that's like one easy button that you could potentially offer. I agree with you. I think that, again, I will say this until the end of time. You get the best form of Josh Allen when Josh Allen does not have to press. Now, defenses in the NFL are good. Sometimes you have a great matchup and that will just happen. But there are times where the play calling and things that you could set up for your quarterback can be effective enough to just dress things up for an easier third down, dress things up
Mhm.
for a more efficient drive. Because at the end of the day, when Josh is in command and feeling good momentum, you could see the stats, and I don't have them pulled up in front of me because I'd have to actually compile it, but I do know that they generated positive EPA based on the down and distance, based on the shorter form. So don't allow him to press. And one way that you could get that is from a screen game that is successful, which I think they could develop if they lean on it a bit more. We're going to
Yeah.
continue this conversation, and we're going to talk about this wide receiver room directly. I know John on Facebook, who left a comment about this earlier. I did not ignore you. I was going to answer it, but then I realized it leaves like 3 comments here, and people on YouTube would be like, who are you talking to? But we are going to list the people that we think will be in this room right after we get a word from the ever so glorious, the ever so handsome gentleman of our brain trust, Mr. Greg Thompson and Aaron Quinn. Guys, they want to. I'm getting word that they want to talk about the one pass, but they're gonna explain it. Guys, what do you got?
Many people ask us the best way to support us here at Cover One, and that is to sign up to become a Cover One Pass member. That contribution helps give us the access to all the data and information we use to create the content that you love.
And I think most importantly, brings you into our community of insiders. It's a great community based on Slack. I know a lot of people don't want to be on social media anymore or be in on those conversations. We bring all of it to you right in our great community of educated fans. And most importantly, you get access to our content creators.
Even better than that, everybody loves merch. You get awesome t-shirts, a cool decal, and a letter from the Cover One team signed directly to you.
All for $60. That gets you the entire season, next year's free agency and draft. $60. Click the link in the description. Cover One Insider. Become one today.
You should become one today. Yes, for 60 gold doubloons, you can become a One Pass member. That One Pass is the lifeblood of Cover One, as it allows us to have access to all of our resources that we can use for our shows. Roy, damn it. This is a good comment and it disrupted my read. They nail this promo every time. They really do. They're very consistent, Roy.
It was
Oh,
awesome of them to stop by and do that.
I
It was
know. Yeah. They completely just, they add, it's like sentence enhancers from SpongeBob. They are show enhancers, Greg and Aaron. But it is the lifeblood of our network that allows us to have resources or access to all of our resources for all of our content that we put out, whether that is the live shows, the pre-recorded shows, the written articles. Everything that we do on this network is because of your OnePass subscription. So if you are interested in signing up, that link is in the description below. I encourage you, if you have been thinking about it, if you are a Bills fan, this is an awesome opportunity to not only get access to our content a bit more directly, but also be involved with some great discussions in our premium channels where we have very educated, fun, awesome people talking about the Bills nonstop. And exciting things are happening. I can't say anything as much as I could say things are happening with stuff, and it's going to be awesome. So you should definitely come check it out. Let's move on in this discussion to the actual wide receiver room. So we know what our tight ends are going to be, right? Like it's Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, and Quentin Morris. We know what our running backs are likely going to be, with the random exception of maybe Frank Gore Jr. somehow is an awesome camp and can make it. But really, we're pretty much expecting it to be James Cook, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson, some order of that. But the wide receiver room itself is a question mark. It is who the hell are they putting at the back end? And it's a weird conversation because it's way more to do with the fact that there's like a bunch of different reasonable and realistic options that could sit there at wide receiver 6 or 7. So Chris, I'll first ask you, how many wide receivers do you think make this room? And who do you think of the fringe guys? So like you can name your names. However, who do we think are the ones that fill the back end of that room?
Yeah, so I've got 6, and that's primarily because I haven't really done a full roster projection at this point, and that 6th roster spot, I can make it what I want at this point. I don't have to worry about a 10th offensive lineman or, you know, a 10th defensive lineman. Like for right now, I'm going to say 6, and I think, you know, the top is locked, you know, Coleman, Shakir, Samuel, and I really believe that MVS and Hollins are also both locks.
I agree with that.
I think MVS brings an element to the team that they actively pursued because post-draft they didn't have that serious deep speed element still. And then Hollins is, you know, that special teams glue guy who, you know, and ends up being a captain everywhere he goes, apparently, and has also shown in, you know, his best year with the Raiders, where he had, I think it was 50 plus catches. You know, he's shown an ability to fill a hole if there's a target vacancy, you know, because of injury. I don't think that's his role on this team, you know, if everybody stays healthy, but there's a capacity there, you know, should, you know, both Shakir and Samuel go down. You know, he can be a reasonable fill in. My wide receiver 6 right now, and it's mostly because I have the same Notre Dame fetish that Chris Kepner does, but it's Chase Claypool, and I'm not proud of it, but I would like to see him be able to turn, you know, this bad attitude around and really and truly access all those physical gifts that are at his disposal. And it will not shock me if he's cut next week for being stupid. You know, like it wouldn't shock me. Like whatever, get rid. You know, the first stupid thing he does, get rid of him. Gone. Like don't tolerate any of this at all. But I would like to hope that he will turn himself around. You know, activate that Calvin Johnson like RAS score that he has, and like, you know what? Go ahead and be the new kickoff specialist and destroy the return game, you know, in those new kickoffs. Like I think that could be a really big role for somebody who has the physical gifts that he has. You know, just stop being a knucklehead, man. Like just come on. And so those are my 6: Coleman, Shakir, Samuel, MVS, Hollins, and then Claypool.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it's 6 as well, with room to be 7 if someone in camp really shines. I want to pull up real fast Mac Hollins' stats in general. This is a chaotic stat list. Like this is just so funny to read. So in 2017, he only had 226 with Philly on 16 receptions, 22 targets. In 2019, played for 2 teams, Miami and Philly, where he eclipsed a total of 125 yards, 10 receptions, 22 targets. Right? So you're like, oh man, this guy's not doing anything. 2020,
nothing.
176 yards, 16 receptions, and 25 targets. Oh man, yeah, back end depth. Then 2021, 223 yards, 14 receptions on 28 targets. Okay, a little bit better, whatever. 2022 Las Vegas Raiders, 690 yards on 57 receptions on 94 targets, averaging 12.1 yards per reception. Now, granted, that's not a far cry from the rest. Where the hell did that come from? And then
the Raiders were a black hole. The Raiders were an absolute black hole, and Mac Hollins did everything he could to fill that talent vacuum.
with four touchdowns in the season, which matched his career high from a previous year. And then he goes to 2023 Atlanta. And this was one of the things I said about the Falcons free agents this offseason was like, if you really want to bargain bin shop, you go to Atlanta. Because guys like Van Jefferson, guys like Mac Hollins, guys like Scotty Miller are all there that I'm not talking about them being your pivotal, massive free agency signing, but like you want back end depth for a cheap price, that's where you go. And in Atlanta, he had 251 yards on 18 receptions, 30 targets, no touchdowns. But I don't think that output had everything to do with him and more to do with the fact that Ritter was not really that impressive. I'm being nice. So Mac Hollins' production profile basically said that as he's been in the league, he randomly decided in 2022 to go off, and that this is where I feel like people talking about Mac Hollins with Josh Allen have an argument. Because if you're talking about Mac Hollins on limited snaps, which in, the Vegas offense, I almost said Oakland, the Vegas offense, it wasn't like he got everything. He had a lot more than he probably did in years past. And I definitely don't think it would match what he would be in Buffalo, but production on his targets, I think there's a realistic case that a quarterback like Josh Allen could get Mac Hollins the ball downfield and it could be a lot of fun. So for the reason I think Mac Hollins is a lock, I think he's going to be on this roster, not even just for that, but also his blocking ability, his big body. That's a big thing that I think is going to be leaned on heavily. So I just want to go on that Mac Hollins tangent. I literally pulled up the numbers and was like, are you serious? That's so funny.
Yeah.
But
he's such a roller coaster. Absolutely.
Roller coaster. Yeah. The barefoot roller coaster, as Roy has put it, a barefoot captain. And listen, he's already endeared himself to the community. He's already making moves there. I think it's great. And he seems like an awesome guy. Everyone speaks very highly of him. I'm getting so derailed, but I was watching the Rich Eisen, Sean McDermott interview today, where Sean McDermott said that apparently after Memorial Day weekend, Mac Hollins texted him a picture of a snake eating its like food, like his pet snake, I guess, eating its food. And it said, everybody eats. So that just basically is kind of what he is. Okay. And that sounds awesome and a fun dude to have in your room. But anyways, talking about the room, 6 to 7, but probably 6. I obviously think Coleman, Shakir, Samuel are your locks. I think Hollins and MVS are your next two. When I look at 6, it's a choose your own adventure of who do I want. And it's based on how you really think their skill set will translate to what you want the immediate impact of this offense to be. Do you think their blocking prowess is the more important factor? Do you think their special teams ability in a new year for special teams is a more important factor? For those reasons, I think my lean right now is Chase Claypool for those reasons and not him as an actual receiving target, with that being something that if that works out, it works out. However, where I am hesitant too is because of, like you said, past issues with Claypool. I am rooting for the guy to figure it out. He is in the NFL. He has clearly had multiple teams say, we don't want him on this team anymore. It's time to move on. And complaints about his maturity levels, all those things. And I'm rooting for him to figure it out and kind of really take that step forward mentally and be able to have a nice career in the NFL. But I kind of see it as he is someone I'll lean to for those reasons alone. But I also think when you look at some of the other options that they've brought in, I like the argument of KJ Hamler, man. I really do, because I think where you get a benefit from him is just adding speed to your offense. And even if it is, not the greatest production profile, despite being in the league for only a handful of seasons, he is someone that I think they took that low risk flyer on with potential to really shine in camp and add in another component where if you're talking about KJ Hamler coming in for that role of gadget speedster that they use in motion packages, where maybe they bring him to the strong side and all of a sudden the defense has to worry about someone getting right by them and being a deep target, or even just a piece that gets used as a decoy to expand the field. Like that is something that I think you could never, I could say you could have too much of, but also like, I think they need more of it. And I, for that reason, say that my two right now would probably be Claypool and Hamler. I think again, there's a lot of blockers in this offense as it is. Is the difference of production in your running back room going to be hinging on Chase Claypool being in your offense or not? I don't know. I don't want to say yes, but I also don't think they would shy away from extra blockers at the same time, or maybe being able to rotate them in. God forbid someone gets hurt and not losing the production of blocking they'll get on their running packages. So I would say those are my two to take the 6 role, with my lean being towards Chase Claypool, even though I'm a bit hesitant to do it. But I see the logic for it. So you Notre Dame people can shine and smile upon me as I have embraced your alumnus and hope that he pans out in the NFL. Chris, any more thoughts on this?
Yeah, I completely agree that like Claypool is probably, what I would think of as best case scenario, but I think Hamler is probably the more realistic option. Like there's also a small part of me that thinks maybe they only go with 5. Like if Ty Johnson can fill kind of that kick returner role and Shakir's returning punts, there's a chance, an outside chance, a small one, but if they look around, particularly at the defensive line or the defensive backfield and say, yeah, we really want to keep one more guy here for the rotation we're envisioning, I think there's a small chance they only keep those 5.
Yeah, I think that's possible too. And actually, John Robert here brings up a great name that I completely forgot to mention, and maybe this is on me. Not maybe, it is on me. I'll take the blame for that one. Justin Shorter too. I mean, Justin Shorter was taken in the 5th round of last year. I understand that's a day 3 pick, but that's not nothing either. And I think the idea of Justin Shorter was, again, to add that size profile, that blocking ability, the special teams ability too. So I also could see the world where Justin Shorter does get it. It's really a matter of, is Justin Shorter picking it up? Is he staying healthy? Do they feel that the veteran experience of Chase Claypool matters more now that it's Joe Brady's offense and not Ken Dorsey's? That's to be seen, but Justin Shorter's very much in the competition. I think it should be acknowledged. He should be acknowledged. Tyrell Shaver should still be acknowledged as options as well. I just think right now, like, if I look at who has a good camp, and Claypool has a good camp, I can't see the team looking at a 25-year-old receiver like him who's been in the league for a few years and saying, like, nah, let's let him go. Like, that would be his opportunity to get a roster spot, and I think you'd see Shorter more likened for the practice squad. But another guy I hope works out. It'd be super cool if Shorter actually does live up to the very lofty expectations that have been set out for him, and he ends up panning out. Like, again, I'm never rooting for anyone to fail as much as I just want to see you kind of prove it if we're talking about putting you on this roster. And I'm sure he wants to. I don't doubt for a second that Shorter is very keen on this. So I want to ask you, Chris, before we wrap it up, and this has been a very, very fun episode. I'm having an absolute blast. Guys in the chat, again, thank you so much for being here. Again, if you haven't already, drop a like. That would be greatly appreciated. If you hate me, drop a like. Think of it as a middle finger instead of a thumbs up. Let's finish our show now. Tell your enemies, as Anthony says. Let's finish this show with who you think, and I'm putting you on the spot here, I apologize, even though I have this in our topic notes. Players you think are going to be the top targets. I've already given you mine. I've spoiled this. So I want to hear what you think about this. Who do you have as your top targets in this offense?
Yep. So I think the way I've talked about Kincaid probably, gives away the goose a little bit. So Kincaid is easily my top target getter. Like, I've got him at around 110 targets. He had 90 last year. The top tight ends in the league have, somewhere around 130, 140 tight end, 140 targets. I think Kincaid is, gets more than he did last year, but not all the way to the number 1 tight end in the league. So about 110 targets, and his hands have come as advertised. And so we're going to have a high catch rate at about 92% and come in just under 1,000 yards for the season. And then I've got him at 6 touchdowns.
Okay. I think that's realistic. I think he had 101 after the playoffs, right? So I could absolutely see with the target share and the high spread that being replicated. In fact, I think the number range after playoffs would be very similar, or even in the regular season, touching the high 90s, touching the low 90s. I think I could see something like 95 and playoffs expand to, like, if they go on a run, like 110, or maybe even breaking that 100 reception mark. It really just depends on how this offense flows. But Kincaid is the number 1. I agree with you. Who do you have as 2 and 3? And T-Dobbs, I'll close the show with this comment. I brought this up because I didn't want him to feel like this wasn't acknowledged. We'll wrap up with this. But 2 and 3, who do you got?
Yeah, so I chickened out and I tied Samuel and Shakir at 75 targets. So, and then I also chickened out and gave them 55 to 60 receptions. Now I gave Shakir the bump in yards, put him in the like 750 to 800 range, with Samuel a little lower, like the 6 to 650 range, because I think their roles are going to be slightly different, within how they're used in the offense. But I completely chickened out. I could not decide. And then I said, oh, hey, that's in line with your collective theory that, we'll have a lot of medium-sized boats this year,
yes,
out there on the river. And so I fully admit that I am a chicken and a coward, and I said 75 targets for each of them. So there we go.
You are not a coward. I completely understand the mindset. It is totally fair, but I do think that it's hard to determine right now. And again, like, just to kind of reiterate the point that we said in the beginning, and it's been said so many times, like, this offense is trying to be versatile. It's trying to be an amoeba. It wants to not be it wants you to not be able to guess what they're going to do next. It's the whole idea. And with effective coaching and scheming and talented quarterback play, you can do this without a Stephon Diggs. You can do this without a clear-cut number one. And a team I liken them to, or at least the direction I would like them to have taken, which I think they are in a way emulating, it might not be directly, but it's similar, is Green Bay. Because I look at Green Bay and I look at what Jordan Love accomplished this year, who was doing great in a lot of the passing metrics, especially in the second half of the year. And you look at the room he has, and even though you did draft Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, like, the one in that offense, there might have been a one in receiving or receptions and targets, but it wasn't clear cut. It wasn't like you had like an alpha, like you still had Devontae Adams. Like, Jaden Reed got pulled. Christian Watson, when he was healthy, got pulled. Dobbs had pulled. Their tight ends, Luke Musgrave, had pulled. Like, a lot of different options that they were able to work effectively because LaFleur's scheme was doing great. And also their running game with Aaron Jones was very effective. I think that kind of, not saying that they're going to be run the same schematically, but more so conceptually, is what I expect this Bills offense to really look like. And while it took Jordan Love some time, and maybe it'll take Josh Allen some time, I really do believe that it is this group that is capable of being productive without, again, having a true destroyer as much as it's a bunch of carriers, as you said, and as Roy is alluding to here. The Bills have a carrier group without the carrier. So, well said. I don't think you're a coward for that take. I think it's hard to determine between Samuel and Shakir who would have more. I think it's Samuel, again, just for usage sake. I think Joe Brady has a rapport with him, and that's why I give him the benefit in the receiving or in the receptions. I almost say receiving yards every time. And as I said before, Kincaid, Samuel / Shakir for me, but I think it's likely Samuel, and then Cook are my three. I am on my James Cook agenda until I'm not anymore. And if I'm right, it's going to be so annoying for all of you. I'm just warning you right now. It's going to be annoying for our group chat. There's two things. There's two specific things, Chris, that I am very much hoping and banking on. One of them is what I just said. The other one, I had Anthony on the show a few weeks ago, and I specifically said, for no reason other than a hypothetical, this wasn't an actual prediction, that Curtis Samuel would have 896 receiving yards. So if he actually ends up with that number to a T, I am going to be insufferable. So I just wanted to
please.
Okay.
You will have earned it. Insuffer like you have never insuffered before. Yes, absolutely.
Never.
You would be your right. It would be your right.
Also, Walter, I wouldn't even call GB lesser, man. They made it to the same round. Like, Jordan Love had an excellent season. They were very, the regular season record, they had growing pains, but I promise you, that team is good, especially offensively. I enjoy watching them. I enjoy seeing, again, too, a lot of injuries that offense faced. Like, I would be happy to compare him to Green Bay, because I think Green Bay is going to be a staple in the NFC for a lot of years, especially with Jordan Love. But let's bring up this T-Dubs comment, which is which FA position. This is how we'll close the show out tonight, everybody. What FA position are they going to go after with the $10 million they got from Trey White leaving? Receiver, defensive player? My take is nobody. I don't think they'd go after anybody besides very cheap depth or maybe a corner. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I actually think that, looking at the last few years, some kind of pass rush presence, there tends to be an older vet in that market who can come available. But if it's not that, I think it's probably more likely that they do nothing with this 10 million based on what we've seen with them from, how many guys we lost on Red Wednesday. There was a move to reset the salary cap in part this year with some of the salaries that they dumped. And, I think it is a completely reasonable idea to think that they're going to let that 10 million roll over into next year.
Yeah. I don't think there's, to me, like, Dwayne Smoot feels like that move that you're describing. Like, that's what it felt like to me, is that it was
Mhm.
the kind of, this is your pass rusher rotation after they had already drafted Solomon and signed Hill. Like, I think Smoot is the one that they did that with, but they got him for a lot less money. I don't see
Yep.
them kind of shoehorning that money out because they had to pay their draft picks too. They also lost a little bit of that money in the Diggs trade too. So it was really more like an 8
Yep.
million. So between that draft picks, you're not left with that. Like, you're left with a chunk that I think you need to save for the season. So I think it's better to hold on to it and just let it save for if you need anything during the year, whether that's someone to just add depth or someone that you can get at the deadline. But we'll wrap it up there, guys. This show has run for nearly an hour and a half. Chris, that was effing awesome. I had a ton of fun with you. I
No,
also
this is great.
Roy, some of you guys have been cooking tonight with your comments. So get 897 just to prove you wrong, Joe. Roy, if that happens, I'm going to be depressed on the show. In fact, I'll hold a funeral for my take. I will never trust Curtis Samuel ever again. And great comment from Carl here. Pocket the money, hold on to it. And if someone gets released and becomes available, Beam will have 10 million to jump on it and get his guy. Absolutely. All right, everybody. This was fun. Chris, again, excellent conversation. You always bring a ton of just data points that are very enlightening, but also just great discussion to the table. And I am just always a fan of having you on here. So let the people know what you got going on, where they can find you, what you got going on in our network, anything you feel like sharing.
Yeah, well, I apologize again for not being Mina Kimes, but just another promo again for the fact that Ant actually did have the real Mina Kimes on disguised coverage that was released today. You can find me behind the screen with the film room, which is now on 5 p.m. on Wednesdays, and Eric Turner and Anthony Prohaska do a fantastic job providing expert film analysis. This week is going to be, it's almost like, we're an organized type of media company where we're going to be talking about Dalton Kincaid and ways that Brady can enhance Kincaid's game even more. I'm also producer for the Greg Tomset show here, and Greg's kind of having a random schedule, so just watch for the Greg Tomset show. He's doing a series of division previews right now, and so getting some guests lined up for that. But watch out for those as they come out. And then there is something in the works for a number of us here at Cover One as writers, where I don't think we can go into the full details of it yet, but I will tell you that there is I didn't realize it was a dream that I had until this opportunity came up, but I'm very excited about some writing opportunities that are coming up for a number of us here at Cover One, and excited to be part of that group. And you can find me at Low Buffa on Twitter, or X, or whatever you want to call it. But Joe, thank you so much for having me on. You're a fantastic host and a rising star, and it's always a good time to get on here with you. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for being here and for the kind words, man. And, again, the show ran a little bit longer than usual tonight because I know Ant wasn't going live at 9 because of the different schedule. And yeah, all of you, please check that episode out after you're done with this. Like, don't go to bed. If you got work early in the morning, then go tired. Check that episode out. He just had Mina Kimes on his show, and it's an excellent episode with a lot of insightful discussion, as is expected for Ant's platform. And for me, you can find me on Twitter at @show_DeRosa. I tweet about the Bills and other random things in the day-to-day, and it is a lot of fun for me, but probably not for you. This was a blast. Again, for the writers of our network, again, I implore you all, for any Cover One article that comes out during the year in the offseason, please check it out. The work they do is incredible. The detail you get is unlike any other org that I think is out there in our space. It is just something that will teach you something every single time. And I think you should follow all of our writers and check it out, because it's well worth your time and you will learn a lot from them. Again, One Pass in the description below. Feel free to sign up. It is well worth your time. Again, a lot of things that you can access there, including our premium channels, which are going to have a lot of insightful discussion for you nonstop. And again, likes and subscribes, shares, everything for our network for this video are always truly appreciated. It helps our channel out. It helps us out. Again, Chris, thank you so much. To all of you in the chat, thank you so much. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening. But for us, we are done for the week. You all stay safe. And as always, go Bills. We'll see you later. Enjoy your